Earlier this week, the Bureau of Statistics, that's Nigeria's Bureau of Statistics, released the latest inflation report. Consumer price inflation is not only a measure of how fast or slow prices of goods change. Inflation statistics is vital in the decisions taken by private and public institutions. Tonight, Babajide Ogunsowo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is here to share insights on what a 33.2% inflation rate means. Babajide, great to have you again on the News at 10.
Good evening, Ayotunde.
So let's get into it. Of course, the central bank has kept increasing the monetary policy rate as a means of reducing rising inflation. Is there any proof that this is actually working?
In the short term, we still don't have proof that the monetary policy rate of change of monetary policy is significantly affecting inflation rates. But Ayotunde, there are three questions Nigerians are asking similar to this. The first question is, why is the monetary policy rate not really influencing inflation rates? And the answer is simple. Monetary policy as a tool globally cannot exclusively be used to bring down inflation rates. For countries that even use monetary policy rates, those countries often have what is, in economic terms, are classified as efficient markets. Does Nigeria have an efficient market? The answer is no. And so the monetary policy rate is not the El Dorado. We cannot legislate inflation rates to come down. So that answers the first question, which is, why is the monetary policy rate not bringing down the inflation rate? The second question Nigerians are asking is, now that inflation is 33.2%, Nigerians are asking, when will inflation come back to single digits? And I'll give you the answer, Ayo. The way to approach this is to understand when last did Nigeria have inflation as high as 33.2%. The answer is in our history books, March 1996. Before March 1996, which other period did Nigeria have inflation rate as high as 33%? Again, our history book tells us 1976 and 1977. The insight here is, in 1996, when we had inflation rate as high as 33%, 1976 and 1977, we had military rulers. General Sani Abacha in 1996, General Obasanjo in 76 and 77. The point I'm making here, Ayotunde, is that never in Nigeria's history have we had a civilian president govern when inflation was as high as 33%. In simple terms, President Tinubu is Nigeria's first civilian president that has a responsibility of bringing inflation down when it is as high as 33%. So whatever happens, this clearly will be a case study not only for Nigerian universities, for international universities, good or bad. Now, to the third and perhaps most important question, what should the government be doing next? And even though the government, yes, has made a lot of positive efforts, what is important is for us right now to have a reliable database of farm produce. In simple terms, what I'm talking about is we need to know who produces what, where, in what quantity, and when. That reliable database of farm produce will clearly allow us to make plans into the future about how to clearly manage the rising prices of food, which clearly is a significant reason why inflation is going out of control. Now we've sorted this out, the next thing is for us to clearly understand what these numbers mean. And in looking at how a lot of people have interpreted these numbers, a lot of these interpretations are wrong. And I'll explain why, Ayo. Listen carefully to this. Two figures, as an example, 10% and 20%. We need to make a distinction between the rate of value change and the rate of percentage change. And I'll explain what I mean. 10% to 20%, that's a difference of, in terms of value, 10%. But in terms of percentage change, it's 100%. And I'll explain what I mean. If you were to take a loan of 100 naira at an interest rate of 10%, the interest you'll have to pay back will be 10 naira. If I were to take a loan, same loan of 100 naira, and I were to pay an interest of 20%, the interest I'll have to pay back will be 20 naira. In simple terms, my interest payments will be double yours. And so we need to understand that 10% to 20% in terms of value is 10%, but in terms of percentage change, it is 100%. So tonight, I would like us to take a look at a concept called how much is Nigeria's inflation rate inflating? In simple terms, how much is the strength of this inflation? And yes, if you look at the numbers we have today in March, 33% inflation rate compared to what it was last year in value terms. However, in percentage terms, it is 51%. Again, using the example I told you, looking at what it was in percentage terms this time last year and what it is this year. And so 51% is how much is Nigeria's inflation rate inflating, the test of the strength of inflation, 51%. Those numbers are extremely dear for the common man. And so 33% allows us to see it on an annual basis. However, for us to test the strength of the inflation, again, how much is Nigeria's inflation rate inflating? That is the answer in front of you, 51%.
So, Robert, let's talk about the issue of pricing now. I mean, how much are prices rising of course, in the world's more developed economies? You talk about issues such as changing global trade dynamics and what have you. What can you tell us about that?
So you're correct. The changing global dynamics, geopolitics, is potentially and actually disrupting trade flows. We could take a look at it in very many ways, but one way to look at it is how much is inflation affecting the world's most populated countries? How much impact are citizens feeling from the rising price of living? In simple terms, people call the situation we face globally a cost of living crisis, chaos everywhere. So if we take a look at the top 10 countries in the world that have the highest population, to find out how different is Nigeria from the rest of the world in terms of countries with the sort of populations and even higher, we find that Nigeria still is an outlier. India, China, annual rate of inflation 4.8%. In China, less than 1%. You heard me clearly. In the last 1 year, average prices of goods in China have risen by less than 1%. In the US, 3.5%, Indonesia, 3%, Pakistan, approximately 21%, Nigeria, 33%, an extreme outlier. Brazil, Bangladesh, Russia, Mexico, all annual inflation rates of less than 10%. So clearly, if you look at what is in front of you, Nigeria's current consumer price inflation stands significantly apart from the average of the top 10 most populated countries, and even significantly higher when we look at what else is going on along developing countries. But I would say, yes, it is. But here's why this is important. You know, the inflation rate is a measure of price stability. Price stability is a measure of your income stability. Your income stability is a measure of your survival stability. And if you ask millions of Nigerians, your survival stability is a measure of your family stability. So the right question we need to ask ourselves is, if families are unstable, can the country be stable?
Which brings me to the last question, of course, the outlook for inflation. What is it going to look like for the second quarter of the year?
There's some good news, but there's some bad news, Ayotunde.
Which should we start with?
Let's start with the bad news.
Go ahead.
Tonight isn't about talking about the performance of the former president or the current president. We'll do that in another 40 days, and we'll do that extensively. But I'd like to share an important fact with you. In President Buhari's 8 years, that's 96 months, never in those 96 months did food inflation, you heard me right, food inflation measured month-on-month basis, never did it exceed 3%. It never even got to 3%. Based on the National Bureau of Statistics report, let's take a look at what food inflation has been only in the first 3 months of this year. And in their report, they show that in January, food inflation 3.2%, February 3.8%, March 3.6%. Politically, these are not the sort of numbers President Tinubu would love to see. Again, because his predecessor had 96 months, and in none of those months did food inflation on a month-by-month basis hit 3%. All right, Tunde, here to the good news. You know, a wise man once said, and listen carefully to this, he said, hunger we get hope, no they kill person. I'll repeat that again. Hunger we get hope, no they kill person. So a lot of Nigerians still have hope. However, the question that we need to now ask ourselves is, how much hope does a common man still have? Ayotunde.
That's a big question, of course. How much hope do we have? I mean, of course, when you're not battling with hunger, you know, there's still a big chance of survival.
But never forget,
what you were trying to say.
Hunger we get hope, no they kill person.
We'll leave it at that. Babaji Doguso, thank you so much for your thoughts on the news at 10.
The pleasure is all mine.